Good evening, everyone. I'm Miko.
I'm Paco.
And I'm Tristan, and welcome to another episode of the WeLit podcast.
A podcast where we analyze literary texts.
Today's episode, we are asked to answer a few questions from you guys about a series of poems from Mostly in Monsoon Weather by Marnie El Calates. But before we get into this, guys, it's been a while.
Yeah,
How
it's
have
been
you all
quite a
been?
while.
Been a
Been a
while,
while.
still stuck in our houses. How do you
Mhm.
manage? Does it ever get messy?
Oh, I don't know. Gets really boring and repetitive
Yeah,
sometimes. Mostly like the same routine. What about you, Tris?
damn.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty chill. Not at all messy. It's just you have to find things to do every day, like different things.
Yeah,
One thing that I've
exactly.
been doing, which you've mentioned last time, is reading. So instead of like leaving our houses, we can leave our house in our minds instead by reading
Yeah.
books.
Yeah, you
Instead of
you guys.
exploring the world, we can explore the fictional world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By
You guys ever play GTA 5 like online? Like that cuz that game just kind of like blew up when quarantine happened because you can literally explore another world as another human being. And it's sort of like a simulation basically of real life. So
Yeah, I haven't
I
played
think
it.
that's one thing that's helped me feel like for the past few.
I haven't played it, but I've heard of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really similar to how books help me kind of imagine stuff. GTA can help others
Yeah.
imagine their
Yeah.
own stuff.
Mhm.
And I think like from what I've been reading recently, it's like books have been, like you said, our way of escaping our houses because like we can't see anything, but sometimes these books can be what allows us to see, like what allows us to have that image of maybe a scenery or a moment that is nostalgic or special to us that we would want to remember.
Mhm.
Maybe that we remember seeing our friends or like,
Mhm.
yeah, and just reading about it sort
Yeah,
of like
most
makes me optimistic about when it will happen again, like
Mhm.
seeing it in the future, it makes me excited just
yeah, the
to
most
finally go
important
out.
thing about these books are like they're able to like rouse up your emotions. Because we're pretty much like emotionless while we do nothing, but these books help us
Yeah,
experience
and
stuff.
it's also like a great way of learning because you also in like the books you
Yeah.
learn new words which we use in our essay writing and all sorts of like day-to-day activities.
Yeah, you learn new things every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that this leads to now our discussion and answering the questions from the book that we've been so heavily teasing in this whole spiel, mostly in Monsoon Weather by Marnie Alcalates. But before we get on to this, who is the author? Marnie Alcalates. What has he
Okay.
done?
Marnie Alcalates is a Filipino poet and translator who has published 3 books of poetry and 9 books of poetry translations from the Filipino language into English. And his latest book, which we are analyzing today, mostly in monsoon weather.
So, on to the first question. You guys asked us, what were the author's motivations in writing the collection of poems? And to sort of answer this, but like kind of not, just to sort of,
Mhm.
make this discussion a little cleaner. Like, what did you guys think about when you first read it? Like, and then we can sort of answer from there, I
Okay.
think.
Well, for me, the first thing that caught my eye was the first 2 poems are more conversational. They aren't like your typical structured poems. They're like a retelling of events. Like if you look at the text, what's it? The Not So Alone in Rome. It's like what you'd get from a tita or a relative that traveled to a country.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
How
get
about
like
you,
the same
Tristan?
idea from you.
Mm-hmm.
It's the poems are a lot more about experiences and like sceneries and things that the author have gone through, and like the way he words it and the way he formats like his poems. It's not like traditional poems wherein you have rhyming words and flowery words and whatever. He's really just trying to convey whatever is happening, whatever like he went through. He really like shows readers the experience he's gone through with
Mm-hmm.
different sceneries and
You know,
different.
for me, like when I read it, I actually couldn't help but compare it to the last text we analyzed, which is "There's No Emergency," and
Mm-hmm.
like they both talk about experiences and they both use heavy imagery. They tell a story
Mhm.
in a contemporary manner, which is the current trend as we can kind of see.
Mhm.
But the difference is that in There's No Emergency, she seems to talk about extremely relatable experiences for us
Yeah.
to sort of relate to, or maybe to tease our future, or just basically her wanted to talk about life in general. And difference between that text and this one is that in this one, he seems to talk about the very genuinely experiences he genuinely enjoys. Like his um his time in Rome or his time in
Mhm.
Palawan. And moreover, like like these stories aren't just random stories. They're stories like that you can kind of see how much he enjoys it and how he's able to so clearly articulate what he saw. Like and especially like in a Filipino way. Like if you look at the Not So Alone in Rome, he sort of goes about every scenery not just with detail, but he does it so quickly, as if with like so much in an almost exciting tone, and also
Mhm.
talks about how he feels when he sees another Filipino. You can see
Yeah.
that he sort of had like he sort of feels like a warm feeling from it, and also how he carries like the Asian sort of culture to Rome in the last part when he says
Mhm.
the tug of home and my other half of the world were catching up to him, how he sort of misses it, which is sort of
Mhm.
a common thing that a Filipino would experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like compared to our last poem, she was just talking about like what's going on in her day, but not in like the sense that this author does. Because what this author does is like he really puts a picture for us to see. Like he really like explains it very well. But
Mhm.
with the author of our last work that we did, she did it more of like a it's relatable in a way, but she wasn't specific. Like a
Mhm.
quip about a joke for the day or like laughing with your workers. It was more
Mhm.
general with the one we did in the past, but this one was more closer to the to the narrator's heart, and like you can tell it's really like his experiences talaga, but it's a dear experience. Like it's not something that occurs every day. It's more of like events he'll remember for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
Yeah, and to add to that, like you can see the genuine emotion like he gets when he's writing. Like in the Not So Alone in Rome, he seems very excited, like what Miko said, very excited to tell the story. And I like to compare it to like when a tita or a relative um tells you about their experiences abroad.
yeah. Like, do you guys see those Viber group chats with your titas that have like so
Mm,
much pictures of just like random
yeah.
stuff in Rome? And he seems to write it almost the same way, because how titas would do it is
Yeah.
they take the family picture in literally every spot, then they put
Mm,
like a random action, having lunch here or something, and like quite literally in this poem, he says, um, cook quick lunch of prosciutto at the stall near the forum. It's almost as if he's writing the Viber group chat of titas, except it's just him just being
yeah.
super excited about it.
Yeah, super relatable.
Yeah, and I feel like
Yeah.
if Instagram was around during the 2000 early 2000s, like he would write it as a caption instead of a poem.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it
It
could be
seems
like one of those status updates on
it
Facebook
seems like a
likes.
Facebook album, like
Yeah,
quite literally. Yeah.
like a
And
really extra Facebook um outline or
yeah, I think moreover, like as Tristan was saying, and as we like, first of all, what we said is that he genuinely likes these moments. These are special to
Mhm,
him. And as Tristan was saying, he seems to tell it very like in a story like manner, in
mhm,
contrast to the last one, which tries to tell a story but isn't like as smooth to read like a novel as this one, because this is almost like a novel. But I think therefore we can say that the author's motivations were not just to talk about these experiences, but he probably wanted to feel some sort of nostalgia for it because he liked this experiences so
Yeah.
much. He wanted to retell to us to maybe excite us for that
mhm.
experience, or to maybe some people to reignite that nostalgia on their own, and more specifically the Filipino, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. So I think this leads to our next question: is
Mhm.
how was the author able to establish his relationship with his readers through his poems?
Well, for me, I felt like while reading the text, I noticed that the poems were kind of Filipino centric, and there are certain words like in the first poem, if we look at it, sometime morning, Sestina, like he mentioned C5, which is what we Filipinos know as a very traffic road. But to from someone looking looking into the Philippines, they wouldn't really know what C5 is. So in that
Yeah.
sense, it's very Filipino centric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super relatable, and especially to us who live in the south. We know like Bikutan, we know C5, we know
Mm.
those roads, and like there are different experiences where you can show like the Filipino culture, like meeting OFWs abroad and
Mm-hmm.
talking to them, like feeling not so alone because you're with your fellow countrymen. So that kind of
Yeah.
shows like the hospitality of us Filipinos, and also
Mm-hmm.
like the scene where he was talking to some natives and like how he wanted to like leave because he couldn't really there was cultural difference between the natives and like a rich Konya boy. So that's kind of similar to us, right? Because we're Konya and stuff. Why are you
In a
staring at me
way,
like
in a
that?
way.
Yeah,
Ish.
I do kind of relate with like the island experience of seeing natives, but I think he wanted to highlight more of like how they smell and how hospitable they were, rather than his experience as another. But I don't know. You can look at it your way. I think you can look at it how your
Yeah,
way.
that's
This
the
is
way I looked at
literature.
it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
And
yeah,
also to like bring up that topic of the islanders, like if you noticed, he also referenced them drinking gin, which is probably like GSM. And if you go to the province, that's one of the most common things you'll see. Like people just making tambay and drinking around. And that's part of the Philippines. That's what makes us the Philippines.
Yeah, and the last poem also like it talked about flying kites or swimming in the stream during dry season. That's like a season us Filipinos experience a
Mm.
lot. It's very hot here and it's dry. It's
Yeah.
dry
He
season.
chose not to use summer, which is more
Yeah.
Western. He chose to
Western.
use dry season, which is what us Filipinos know more.
Yeah, and I think like in the first poem, "Sometime Morning Sestina," the most one of my favorite parts is just the beginning. He talks, he quotes here, "I catch myself imagining I just caught a glimpse of sea shimmering at my left, and Mayon looming at my right." And in the rest of the poem, he talks about the city. So I think what that is that again, going back to nostalgia, he probably might have came from the province because it's only in provincial places where you can see literally the sea at your left and Mayon at your right, like, and maybe in Bicol. It's only in those places. So I think he's also reminiscing other experiences which are more Filipino, such as like moving from the province to Manila and being super overwhelmed with the traffic, as he explains in the rest of the
Yeah.
poem. Because there's so many people
Yeah.
in Manila, and it's just so Filipino to go from your province and then go to Manila to find your job, which is why it's like so
Mm.
heavily populated. So
Yeah, it's so
I think
natural.
he's quite explicit with what Filipino experiences he uses, and everything in this poem is looked through with the Filipino eye. Like in the times he describes the encounters he has with natives and islands, he highlights
Mm.
like their smiles, which is what we tend to focus on more when
Yeah.
we enter those places. And also
Mhm.
in the parts where in the poem about his experience in Rome, he talks about how he would want to be near the tourist sites because the Filipinos would just want to walk to it super quickly, in contrast to maybe a European who would want to stay at the quiet places and make their way to the
Yeah.
urban areas. And yeah, like in like just how that contrasts.
Mhm.
And another thing about the Filipino eye is that he like the Filipino words he uses, especially in the last poem, like cadena de amor and the old maybe like the remnants of Spanish terms that remain with us, like agua de mayo. He
Mm.
explicitly uses that to sort of convey that he wrote this for the Filipino, like for us, and using our culture so that we can relate to it like quite heavily, don't you think?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
so too.
agree.
Yeah. And so I think now we have to answer the next question, which is why do some of the poems in the collection lack rhyme and structure?
Oh,
Um,
oh, go ahead,
oh,
Tristan.
you go.
Okay. Well, Well, because the poems are contemporary, so they don't really have to follow the regular form and tradition of older poems. So the writer can freely express what he wants to say and the message he wants to share with the readers.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at maybe the old poems, they're sort of like you have to read and dig deeply into what he's trying to
Mm-hmm.
say because it's a guessing game. It's the hardest guessing game. Like I had a hard time reading Shakespeare because not only was the English he used quite old, but you really had to read in between the lines occasionally. Whereas over
Yeah.
here, it's like super contemporary. I think how it's
Mm-hmm.
contemporary is in that question itself, how it lacks rhyme and structure. But what that contemporary expression mode allows for is that it allows for him to shift his poems from things you have to read in between the lines for. And it allows him for him to like express it freely, like a
Mm-hmm.
story. Like he could just simply retell it so that we can just read it without having to read in between the lines so that we know what he's talking about, what image he's using. And so I think that it's also a strength that he like stuck to the contemporary theme because that's
Mm-hmm.
what allows him to make use of more imagery and describe everything more vividly in contrast to
Yeah.
maybe the old styles wherein you can describe things vividly, but it's not like a storybook wherein it's just you go by it, reading through it, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can see
Yeah,
it in your head, you know?
yeah. Just like you
Yeah.
said, like he was making a story, he's trying to make a story. So you the reason behind the poem is also deeply like intertwined with the way the poem is made, obviously. So like we talked about in the first question, he wanted to like share his experiences with us Filipinos. So
Mm-hmm.
it's better for him to write in a contemporary way and like to not do double meanings. So
Mm-hmm.
we see like the picture like straight on. Like we already see like what he's writing in words.
Yeah. And like how he says it, it's like a story, and it like shares like a wider range of the audience. Like if a child were to read it, I feel like they'd understand it as compared to like a child reading Shakespeare. They'd have to like analyze it really deeply. They'd have
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
learn the language of Shakespeare. They'd have to know the backstory behind every little detail. And I'm
yeah,
sure they'd enjoy it too, but for the more contemporary style of poem, it's easier to understand and easier to get into as a first time reader.
yeah. It's not like we have like standards as the same standards we had like in the 1800s and 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
We're not all like as cultured as we were back then. We're not like that fancy or whatever. We're
Mm-hmm.
fine with anything nowadays. Like it's better for
Yeah,
us.
actually, in my opinion, like I wouldn't say that it's not that we strayed away from being fancy. It's sort of like the objective of what literature was back then and what poetry was. I think that the objective back then was almost always to be maybe like in the Renaissance era to be revolutionary, maybe in a
Mm-hmm.
sense,
Oh yeah.
so that your English has to be super profound, so that other Renaissance men could read it and say,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is a profound work of art." But
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
what you sort of shifted to is to make art something that everyone can do, something that
Yeah.
everyone can relate to, and so that emphasizes the experience of the artist. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like the aesthetics or like the style of writing that's important to us now, but what seems to be more important to us now is what do you want to say so that you can create
Oh yeah.
that change in
Mm-hmm.
society, or how
You're
do you
right.
want to affect your viewers, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that he stays very true to that, but the very strong central theme that we've been talking about, like nostalgia, the
Mm-hmm.
best way to capture nostalgia is through telling a story. Like
Yeah.
what like your older people telling you, as you mentioned, like your tita's telling you of this story, they
Mm-hmm.
literally explain it to you in a story so that you can just absorb it and you can see everything. So I think that, like, moreover, the reason why they lack structure is because he not only wanted to tell a story, but it's a memory which he wanted to capture quite purely so that we can all
Mm-hmm.
bask in that same memory without having to be extremely like flustered by how deep the English is
Yeah.
or being too focused on the rhyme scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the emphasis shifted to what do I want to say, so that what do I want my readers to see, and that's why all we see is this feeling of nostalgia and all these experiences coming together to inspire us maybe to go there one day, maybe like almost like a tour, like a Filipino tour guide guiding us
Yeah,
around.
like a tour guide.
Yeah. And also just all these experiences like becoming super easy for us to tell what he's trying to talk
Mhm.
about, you know. And that's just the beauty of contemporary Filipino literature is how intimate it is. It's not
Yeah.
gonna force you to like read it. It's just an open book, and this is
Mhm.
quite clearly like an open book of his experiences, of his head, of his feelings
Mhm.
within those places. And yeah, I think that's what I enjoyed most about it. You know?
Yeah, I really liked it though. Like he's not trying to be anyone special. Like he's not trying to be Shakespeare. He's not trying to be a great poet. He's just casually retelling the events that he wants to tell. And the emotions that he got from these places are being told in the story that he's telling. And that's one of the main things I really liked about the story itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like quite like I think what is just that for me, like just personally, I used to be sort of like a huge fan of because I sometimes when I write, I used to be a fan of like using flowery words
Mhm.
or having a quite super distinct rhyme scheme so that when people read it, they're like, ah, I see that. This has sort of given me sort of a new perspective into how you can make what you want to say stand out more without having to use rhymes and just like
Yeah.
simply talking about it. Because what what this writing style does is that it allows you to just focus on the moment that's
Mhm.
happening
Yeah.
without having to say, ah, look at this extremely Easter eggy rhyme scheme, or look at
Mhm.
this extreme reference he makes to this other literary work which he wrote 10 years ago. It just
Yeah.
allows you to bask in it. And
Yeah, you're right.
he ultimately just achieves his goal through the structure and his writing style. And
Mhm.
his goal, as you mentioned, was to retell the story with nostalgia and to establish that relationship with us by making it easy to read and an open book, which is probably one of my favorite advantages of contemporary Filipino literature.
Mhm.
Yeah, I noticed like nowadays it's not really knowledge based, it's more on like your idea because knowledge is so accessible to everyone.
Mhm.
Like you can just
Yeah.
search up random words. You don't have to show off by saying these words. So
Yeah.
the idea and like what you're trying to convey is more important nowadays
Yeah.
in the contemporary era.
And the content
Yeah.
and the message also.
Yeah, like the
Yeah.
message is more important.
Yeah, guys, I actually gotta say, like, I actually like, especially because you're in quarantine. This thing, so it allowed me to relive what happened outside my house before we were forced in here. You know, and I think it was quite fun to read, like,
Mhm.
Yeah,
quite for me.
it's similar to how like you look at pictures and you're like, oh dang, I missed this.
Exactly,
Yeah, that
exactly.
reminiscence.
Yeah. I do that a lot. I look at my phone, I look at my pictures, I'm like, dang. And I imagine like a scenery where the
Mhm.
photo appeared.
And
So
I
it's
found the texts very inspiring in a way. Because, like, for me, I've never really been to Rome. I've never been to Palawan, but I know, like, Metro Manila. And
yeah.
and the author, like, in a way, kind of inspired me to, like, want to go to Palawan, want to go to Rome.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
what about you guys?
yeah, and
Yeah, I've gone to Palawan, so but the way he
yeah,
conveyed it is like very similar to the experience I had,
Mhm.
having like a tour
yeah.
guide and boating, and it's pretty similar.
So it definitely brought like your nostalgia, like back. Just everything came back, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah, I haven't actually been to Rome either, but you know, I'm pretty sure we all know the feeling of like seeing like another Filipino in that place who might be an OFW or another tourist, and they
Yeah,
just go like, "Yeah, here's my number if you ever need help." And it's just like, "Wow, okay, I just met you five
Yeah.
minutes ago," but that's the Filipino spirit, I guess. And
Mhm.
yeah,
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 we always have like that bond. We always want to help each other as Filipinos, especially like if the OFW lives in another country. Well,
yeah,
in my past experiences, like there was one time I was in San Francisco and I asked the shop owner who was Filipino about something, and that shop owner like immediately told me the whole history of the item I wanted to buy, and that for me was like very meaningful because someone took time out of their day to explain something that would have been very simple.
Yeah.
Both me and and Miko's sister study in the States, so I'm sure like she's told you experiences of how like
Mhm.
she's met other Filipinos and how they've bonded. My sister personally told me like she was invited to eat dinner at someone's house. So I
Yeah.
guess that's the extent of like Filipino
Dang.
hospitality.
Now I miss traveling, guys. What the heck?
Yeah.
All right. I think we can end here. That is it for today. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in once again to the WeLit podcast. This has been Miko, Paco, and Tristan, and good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.